Beneath the boundless sky of the endless plains, the currents of fate began to churn unseen. An ancient ritual long sealed by time was quietly awakened, its echoes stirring blood and soul alike. As cultivators gathered and the heavens held their breath, a presence older than history prepared to descend, drawn by sacrifice, bound by destiny, and guided by a single name whispered across the land. If you enjoy my way of explaining and storytelling, don't forget to like and subscribe. It really motivates me to keep creating. In a sudden gale, a flash of golden radiance burst forth before the middle-aged man. The gold flame stone shot into the air without warning. Caught completely off guard, he lunged forward in alarm, stretching out his hand to seize it, but the stone streaked past him like a comet, vanishing in a trail of light before landing squarely in Han Li's grasp. In that instant, everyone present was struck dumb. Han Li held the stone casually in one hand, lowering his gaze to inspect it with measured calm, as though the surrounding crowd did not exist at all. The middle-aged man's face drained of color, rage boiling beneath his pallor. His eyes fixed eerily on Han Li as he spoke through clenched teeth, his voice cold and venomous. "Hand it over. Cut off one of your arms and I may spare your life." After Monarch Soul Divergence confirmed without a doubt that the gold flame stone was genuine, Han Li flicked his wrist and stored it away in his pouch. Lifting his head, he smiled faintly at the man and replied in an indifferent tone, "I desire this item as well. However, I have no intention of giving it to you, nor of crippling myself. Would it not be wiser for fellow Taoist to withdraw quietly and avoid stirring up unnecessary trouble?" Those words only served to fuel the man's fury. His fists clenched tightly as a foot-wide halo of white light abruptly flared around his body, his killing intent surging as he prepared to strike. Sensing something amiss, the icy woman at his side narrowed her eyes at Han Li. Speaking in the language of Great Jin, she asked coolly, "Commander Gu, what is the meaning of this? What exactly is that strange object? If it holds no great importance, do not provoke trouble." The middle-aged man hesitated briefly before responding through voice transmission. The moment she received his message, shock rippled across her face. Her expression stiffened as she asked sharply, "Is that truly so? Are you absolutely certain?" "I am beyond doubt," the man replied excitedly. "You know, I was once a toolsmith. I have studied the Supreme Stone records countless times. If we deliver this wondrous treasure to the palace master, the merit we earn will far exceed that of capturing the traitor or retrieving the snow crystal pearl." Hearing this, the woman turned her gaze once more toward Han Li, carefully verifying his cultivation. He was indeed only at the foundation establishment stage. A cold glint flashed in her eyes as murderous intent welled up within her heart. Raising her brows slightly, she issued a frigid command. "Attack. Kill every member of the soaring tribe. Leave no witnesses. The Endless Sky Temple will not turn hostile toward our 9 Immortals' palace over a handful of low-grade cultivators and a few hundred mortals. At worst, we compensate them with a trivial sum." As her words fell, she opened her mouth and spat forth a streak of silver light, which vanished in a flash and appeared before a soaring tribe foundation establishment cultivator in the blink of an eye. Though protected by a blue barrier, the cultivator stood no chance against a full-powered strike from a core formation expert. A scream rang out as his body was cleaved cleanly in two. The silver streak circled through the air once before revealing itself a sparkling white dagger, roughly a foot in length. The Great Jin Foundation establishment cultivators reacted without hesitation. One after another, they unleashed their magic tools, launching a fierce assault against the remaining soaring tribe cultivators. As for the mortals farther away, they were ignored for the moment. There was nowhere for them to flee. Fury and alarm surged through the soaring tribe cultivators as they found themselves under sudden attack. Yet one was only at early foundation establishment, while the other two remained at chi condensation. Against the combined assault of 6 Great Jin cultivators, they managed to resist only briefly before being slain. Once they fell, the great Jin cultivators turned their attention toward Feng Yue's carriage. The icy woman watched this scene with complete indifference as she stood atop the massive bat. However, the moment she turned her gaze toward the middle-aged man, her expression changed drastically. The instant the order to attack was given, the middle-aged man spat out his flying sword, which shot toward Han Li as a streak of white light. Han Li merely sighed. Flipping his hand, he summoned a small pitch-black flag. With a casual wave, the flag billowed as black light surged forth, instantly forming a protective barrier around him. The white streak struck the barrier and was rebuffed without leaving the slightest mark. Alarmed and unsettled by the ease with which his attack had been blocked, the middle-aged man hastily executed a sword art. The white streak whirled through the air before expanding into a 10-meter-long silver python. Coiling tightly around the barrier, it opened its jaws wide, attempting to tear through with its fangs. Yet the black barrier remained utterly unmoved, impervious to the python's crushing force. The icy woman's heart sank when she finally saw the barrier clearly. Just as she had suspected, there was a reason this Foundation establishment cultivator dared to contend with a core formation expert. Her gaze hardened. Pointing toward her dagger, she commanded it to strike. The magic treasure trembled briefly before plunging down toward the barrier with ferocious force. She exchanged a glance with the middle-aged man. Both stared at the still intact black barrier in disbelief. Turning sharply, the icy woman barked an order at her subordinates. "Ignore the one in the carriage. Burn this one alive." The Foundation establishment cultivators immediately released their fire-red spell banners. A vast cloud of flames roared into existence and slowly descended upon Han Li's barrier from above. "Good. Very good," Han Li said calmly. "This will save me some effort." A flash of light erupted atop the black barrier, revealing a giggling black-green nascent soul, clutching a pitch-black flag in its tiny hand. "Nascent soul. You're a nascent soul cultivator." The icy woman felt as though she had been struck by a heavy hammer. Panic flooded her face as she cried out, "We will stop at once. We will leave immediately. We dare not contest the item." At the same time, she urgently recalled her dagger. But Han Li's second nascent soul sneered faintly. With a flick of its wrist, the flag surged, expanding to over 10 meters in height. Dense black chi exploded outward, swallowing everything in its vicinity. The fire cloud, the magic treasures, all of it. In that instant, every great Jin cultivator lost their connection to their magic tools. A yin-sifting banner. "You're an elder of the yin-sifting sect." The middle-aged man cried out in terror. Light erupted from his body as he shot into the sky like a shooting star, abandoning his magic treasure without a second thought. The icy woman's blood ran cold. Without hesitation, she slapped several spell seals onto the enormous bat and stomped down with her foot. The creature swelled to 1/3 larger, glowing with brilliant green light as it let out a piercing cry before tearing through the sky in a streak of emerald, radiance fleeing in the opposite direction. Accustomed to the merciless vengeance of devil sects, she never truly believed the elder would spare them. At the same time, hatred burned in her heart toward the meddlesome middle-aged man. Had it not been for him, they could have departed without incident. The Foundation establishment cultivators scattered in blind panic, fleeing in every direction atop their magic tools. Azure light flickered within the roiling devilish cloud as Han Li emerged above it, his gaze icy as he surveyed the fleeing enemies. He slapped the pouch at his waist. A dozen half-foot-long streaks of light shot forth, splitting into pairs as they pursued the 6 fleeing cultivators. It was the 6-winged frost centipedes. At the same moment, black light pulsed from the banner, forming a pitch-black hole in the air. A massive gold-devouring beetle burst forth, wrapped in black crimson light flashing in its eyes. With a thunderous hum, it unfolded its wings and transformed into a golden streak as it chased after the middle-aged man. Once the beetle departed, the black-green nascent soul mounted the yin-sifting banner and dove back into the churning devilish cloud. The cloud roiled violently, emitting shrill cries as it surged forward. In the blink of an eye, it crossed 300 meters, barreling toward the enormous bat like a descending devil god, trailing dense black smoke behind it. Han Lai remained suspended in mid-air, watching the unfolding slaughter with complete indifference. The soaring tribe mortals had long since fled when they witnessed their immortals fall. A few braver ones lingered at a distance, but none dared approach Han Li after witnessing such terrifying power. In mere moments, the six-winged frost centipedes caught up to the fleeing cultivators. Even core formation experts feared their icy chi. The cultivators were frozen solid in massive chunks of ice, their primal souls preserved for later consumption. Bereft of his magic treasure, the middle-aged man fled no faster than his subordinates. The looming insect closed in rapidly. Despair contorted his face as the gold-devouring beetle effortlessly pierced his defenses and burrowed into his body. A scream echoed through the sky before he fell lifeless from above. As for the icy woman and her mount, though their cultivation was not high, her spell seals granted astonishing speed. Even so, Han Li's second nascent soul eventually overtook them. The black cloud swallowed them whole, granting the woman a silent end. By the time the second nascent soul returned, Han Li was calmly turning the snow crystal pearl over in his hand. When he glanced at the remnants left behind by the great Jin cultivators, a rare look of bewilderment crossed his face. Han Li murmured softly to himself as he looked down at the corpse of the burly youth who had once possessed the snow crystal pearl. He had originally intended to save the young man and question him about the great Jin, but judging from the corpse's dark purplish complexion, it was clear that the youth had taken poison and ended his own life. Knowing full well that this calamity would be nearly impossible to escape, the youth had swallowed a violent toxin before the battle even began. That way, even if he were captured, he would never have to fear his soul being refined. Yet judging by how swiftly his soul had dissipated, it seemed he had taken additional measures beyond mere poison. Han Li shook his head, slightly unsure whether he should laugh or sigh. Had the youth somehow learned in the afterlife that Han Li had actually intended to save him, the irony would have been profound. Still, the two shared no bond, and Han Li felt no particular attachment to the matter. With that thought, he casually flicked a small fireball toward the corpse, reducing it to ashes in an instant. Moments later, the cloud of devilish ki returned. Han Li's second nascent soul waved the small black flag in its hand, drawing the roiling black mist back into the banner. It then circled once above Han Li before sinking quietly into the top of his head. Han Li swept his gaze across the surroundings and saw the soaring tribe mortals staring at him with undisguised fear. "There's no reason to linger here," he said calmly toward one of the carriages. "Follow me. You still owe me the location of the secret cave before you die." Feng Yui slowly stepped out from the carriage, his head still hidden beneath a cloak. His voice carried a faint trace of excitement as he spoke. "So you were truly an elder of the yin-sifting sect. No wonder you could so easily kill the traitor Feng Zhen and possess a medicine as rare as the vast essence pill." "A yin-sifting sect elder." Han Li let out a cold chuckle. "That can be discussed later. Let's go." With that, he stepped onto his flying sword and rose into the air. Feng Wei hesitated briefly before following closely behind. Two streaks of light pierced the sky, gradually disappearing into the distance. Only then did the soaring tribe mortals finally gather the courage to regroup and reform their caravan. When their leaders met face to face, bitter expressions filled their features. All of the immortals they had hired were either dead or had fled. To this moment, they still could not comprehend what had truly happened. Over the following days, news of the incident slowly spread. Although the fallen cultivators were of relatively low grade, their deaths were nevertheless significant, especially because they involved cultivators from the Great Jin. Several temples responded immediately upon hearing the reports. After conducting investigations, they determined that the killer of the Great Jin cultivators was the same foreign cultivator who had previously slain several of their own immortals. Based on eyewitness accounts from the mortals, as well as the fact that the deceased cultivators hailed from the Great Jin, the foreign cultivator's identity was soon established. He was believed to be an elder of one of the 10 grand sects of the Great Jin, the Yin-sifting sect. In the earlier clashes, it was clear that the foreign cultivator had not used his full strength, as he had kept his sect protecting treasure in reserve. But now that the Yin-sifting sect's sacred flag had been revealed, it became evident that this individual was no ordinary elder. He was among the most important figures within the sect. The soaring tribe immortals, who had once faced him, trembled when they learned of this. Before long, several of the soaring tribe immortals arrived at a shared conclusion regarding the foreign cultivator's presence in the endless sky plains and the terrifying force with which he attacked them. Decades ago, during the Holy War, the Yin-sifting sect had supported the Mulan tribes. Could it be that this Yin-sifting sect elder had infiltrated deep into the endless sky plains to seek revenge for the Mulan's defeat? Or was there some deeper conspiracy at play? This explanation, though flawed, was convincing enough to justify his actions. With a tangible background now assigned to their enemy, the soaring tribe immortals felt a measure of relief. Believing they finally understood their foe, they convinced themselves they now knew how to deal with him. The Endless Sky Temple reacted swiftly. A large number of cultivators were dispatched to patrol the border between the Jin Empire and the Endless Sky Plains, preventing any attempt by the Yin-sifting sect to rescue their elder. At the same time, they began assembling a formidable group of nascent soul cultivators intent on eradicating him. Regardless of his identity or strength, the foreign cultivator would not be allowed to leave the Endless Sky Plains alive. Should he somehow escape, the loss of face to the Endless Sky Temple would be immeasurable. For the day of spirit release, the Endless Sky Priestess personally presided over the spirit release rites at one of the temples. The ceremony, normally lengthy, was hastily concluded in just 2 days. On the following day, more than 100 high-grade immortals completed their purification rites and gathered behind the temple in a heavily guarded, restricted area. This restricted zone spanned over 3,000 meters. At its center lay a massive formation diagram embedded with more than 100 mid-grade spirit stones. At the very heart of the formation stood a light gray altar over 20 meters tall. It was constructed from plain white stone, devoid of ornamentation save for several unfamiliar talismanic characters etched into its surface. Around the formation stood over a dozen early-stage nascent soul cultivators, each stationed in place with solemn expressions as though awaiting the descent of something momentous. After a brief silence, 2 women and 1 man entered the restricted area. The woman in the center was slender and dressed in silver robes. A white shawl concealed her face, yet her flawless skin, jet-black hair, and enchanting eyes alone were enough to stir the soul. The man accompanying her appeared to be in his early 30s, elegant in bearing his gaze seemingly unfathomable, as though containing an endless depth. At her other side stood a woman with an alluring figure and a strikingly beautiful face. Her strange purple hair flowed freely as she walked. She wore yellow garments, her arms bare, each encircled by jet black, fist-sized ghost heads that bit into her flesh, yet she displayed not the slightest sign of pain. "Greetings, Saintess." "Greetings, Grand Elders." The surrounding soaring tribe immortals immediately bowed upon seeing the trio. The 3 acknowledged them with slight nods and advanced 10 meters toward the altar before stopping and turning. Around, the silver-robed woman turned gracefully and spoke in a clear, melodious voice. "There is no need for excessive ceremony. This summoning ritual is not only meant to hunt down the foreign cultivator, but also to allow the incarnation of our sacred beast to permanently remain within our temple. I hope all fellow Taoists will lend your full strength." In preparation for these rites, the 2 Grand Elders have spent over 10 years making arrangements. She paused briefly before continuing. "Grand Elders, please present the offerings." Excitement rippled through the gathered immortals. The elegant man and the purple-haired woman exchanged glances, smiling faintly before clapping their palms together. A series of heavy thuds echoed through the ground. Startled, many cultivators hurriedly turned to look around. From both sides of the plaza, 2 groups of towering copper statues strode forward. Each statue stood 6 meters tall, their bodies gleaming with golden light. There were 8 statues per group, and each carried a massive wooden palanquin as they advanced slowly toward the altar. When the palanquins were set down before the altar, even the most composed among the onlookers could not suppress their gasps. Resting upon one palanquin was a massive bison radiating azure light. On the other lay a colossal white python, its body coiled tightly in slumber. What was most striking was the dense demonic chi emanating from both beasts. It was clear they were peak Grade 7 demon beasts, only a step away from ascending to the fearsome Grade 8. No wonder the Grand Elders had spent so many years capturing them alive. The silver-robed woman swept her gaze across the crowd and spoke calmly. "This is an azure wind bison and an ice armor python. Both are exceedingly rare and suitable as sacrifices. Whether they will suffice to anchor the sacred beast's incarnation in our mortal realm remains to be seen. Let us begin preparations." She lifted her hand and gestured toward the beasts. Instantly, countless silver threads shot forth, binding the 2 demon beasts tightly. As silver light flared, the massive creatures were lifted from the ground and slowly drawn toward the altar. At that moment, the azure wind bison began to awaken. Realizing its peril, it thrashed violently, attempting to break free. Yet multiple layers of restrictions and over 100 silver chains bound its body, rendering it utterly immobile. Unable even to roar, it could only watch in furious terror as it drifted toward the altar. Turning back to the altar, the silver-robed woman flicked her sleeve. A fist-sized sphere of azure light shot into the air, circling once above the bison before stopping. The light faded, revealing a small cauldron, wrapped in faint azure flames, spinning slowly in mid-air. The saintess formed a hand seal and began chanting in a low, steady voice. The azure flames surged violently, causing the cauldron to steadily expand until it reached 3 meters in height. Had Han Li witnessed this scene, he would have been utterly stunned. Aside from the flames surrounding it, the cauldron was nearly identical to the Heaven Void cauldron. Its shape, its structure, even the carvings adorning its surface were strikingly similar. The Endless Sky Saintess gradually quickened her incantations. Extending a single finger toward the cauldron, she commanded its lid to burst upward in a streak of azure radiance. At once, countless sparkling grains of sand surged forth from within, billowing outward and enveloping the altar in a shimmering haze that left all spectators utterly entranced. Seeing this, the saintess halted her chanting and pointed calmly at the chained bison atop the altar. In a flash of light, the silver chains abruptly constricted, biting savagely into the beast's flesh. They sliced through it like countless invisible blades, severing bone and sinew alike, reducing the massive body into more than 100 pieces in an instant. A thick metallic stench of blood flooded the air. The azure sand streamed down like a living tide, coating the silver chains and blanketing the altar. Beneath the stunned gazes of the onlookers, the remains of the bison began to pulse with azure light as the sand steadily devoured its flesh. Suddenly, a ball of green light shot out from the disintegrating corpse and soared skyward. It was the azure wind bison's primal soul, painstakingly cultivated over countless years. Yet before it could escape, several bolts of azure light erupted from the altar, striking it down and forcing it back into the swirling sand below. By the time it would take to finish a meal, the massive beast had vanished completely. Flesh and bone alike had been reduced to nothing, every grain of azure sand now tinged faintly with its blood. The saintess observed this without a flicker of emotion. She calmly gestured toward the enormous white python, and the chains tightened once more, silently drawing it onto the altar. What followed was another sacrifice no different from the first. When the flesh and souls of both peak Grade 7 demon beasts had been consumed, the azure sand transformed, coalescing into a suspended cloud of blood-red mist above the altar, floating there without motion. The saintess formed another incantation seal, willing the enormous cauldron to rise from the altar. It trembled slightly as it lifted into the air. Turning to the 2 late nascent soul cultivators behind her, She spoke respectfully. "I am about to begin the summoning of the holy beast. I ask the two of you to lend me your strength." The elegant man smiled faintly. "Naturally. We will spare no effort." The purple-haired woman curved her lips into a smile as well, nodding once the saintess raised both hands. Her fingers flickered as she struck the surrounding formation with one spell seal after another. Instantly, the formation flared to life, radiating brilliant light. The massive cauldron and the formation beneath it began to pulse in unison with azure radiance. At the same time, the flames surrounding the cauldron visibly weakened. Stepping half a pace forward, the saintess raised her head and uttered an obscure incantation. The two grand immortals placed a hand upon her shoulders, slowly channeling vast streams of spiritual power into her body. Silver light blossomed across the saintess's form, and the image of a flood dragon with the head of an ox slowly manifested upon her forehead. She pressed her palms together, then separated them, releasing two beams of pure spiritual power that struck the cauldron. As it spun, the cauldron absorbed the white light endlessly. Soon, a mist of azure radiance poured forth, condensing into a head-sized sphere of light above it. As time passed, the mist continued to gather, causing the sphere to glow with blinding brilliance. The saintess's expression grew grim. The beams of light in her hands fluctuated erratically as she struggled to maintain control over the cauldron. The two grand immortals continued to pour spiritual power into her without pause, not daring to falter for even an instant. Time crept by. The sphere of light grew increasingly dazzling, releasing a piercing shriek that echoed across the restricted area. In response, the surrounding formation began to hum, firing beams of multicolored light directly into the sphere. The saintess's expression tightened with caution as she hastened her incantation. After some time, the sphere suddenly contracted, then burst apart, transforming into a blazing azure sun. The radiance swiftly faded, revealing an egg-sized azure void suspended in the air. The void lingered only briefly before vanishing. In the next instant, a streak of scarlet light shot out from where the void had been and plunged directly into the cloud of blood above the altar. The scarlet light acted like a magnet. The bloody grains surged toward it in a violent rush, wrapping tightly around it and forming a writhing, foot-sized crimson cocoon. The soaring tribe immortals stared in stunned silence. Without a word, the saintess pointed toward the cauldron. Countless azure threads burst forth, ensnaring the crimson cocoon and dragging it inside. The cauldron's lid slammed shut with a thunderous clang, sealing it completely. Azure flames erupted around the cauldron, surging to a height of 10 meters and fully engulfing it. Beneath the altar, the formation flickered and condensed an astonishing amount of spiritual chi, which slowly poured into the roaring flames. Only then did the saintess exhale softly, a hint of relief crossing her face. Turning around, she spoke clearly. "The ritual has concluded smoothly. However, we must wait 1 full month to see the results of the holy beast's incarnation. Even if it cannot remain permanently in our mortal realm, it will persist for no less than 7 days. That will be more than sufficient for it to locate the foreign cultivator. Once the holy beast completes its sculpted body, the two grand immortals and I will personally lead the hunt. Until then, all of you should rest and make your preparations." Naturally, none of the soaring tribe immortals raised any objections. They all withdrew, though a few could not resist glancing back at the massive cauldron one last time. Before long, only the saintess and the two grand immortals remained within the restricted area. "Fellow Taoist Shu immortal son, the saintess said, turning to the two late nascent soul cultivators, "I must trouble you both to guard the cauldron for the next 2 days in case of any unforeseen occurrences." Of course, the purple-haired woman replied at once. "We would not wish 10 years of effort to fail at the final moment." The elegant man simply nodded. Hearing this, the saintess finally relaxed. But in the very next instant, a series of muffled, thunderous growls reverberated from within the cauldron, causing her expression to freeze. The three exchanged a glance and immediately sat cross-legged around the altar. Yeah. 2 days later, the ringing of bells echoed repeatedly throughout the endless sky temples. The remaining low-grade cultivators and tribes within the temples looked on in astonishment. Shortly thereafter, over a dozen streaks of light tore through the heavens, racing south without pause. Though their speed made it impossible to discern who flew within them, it was obvious to all who witnessed the sight that none belonged to low-grade cultivators. 3 days later, an azure streak swept past the southern reaches of the Heavenly Water River, the largest river in the endless sky. Plains. Circling once above the water's surface, it revealed itself to be a crimson flood dragon, bearing the head of an ox. The creature measured only a dozen meters in length, its form shrouded by a faint layer of azure light that obscured its true appearance. Floating above its head was the endless sky saintess, her gaze sweeping across the river below. Moments later, several streaks of light descended from the sky as the two grand immortals arrived. "Fellow Taoist Lin, has the holy beast found him?" the purple-haired woman asked. Without question, the saintess replied, "That man carries far too many gold-devouring beetles. He cannot hide from the holy beast's senses. He should be near the river's surface. He is indeed cunning. Every time the holy beast submerged, he seized the opportunity to flee, evading us again and again. Let us move." "Good," the elegant man said coldly. "I also wish to see whether he truly is an elder of the yin-sifting sect." Brother Hu already struck him with the elemental immortal rest palm, yet he still managed to escape. "I am curious to see just what he is capable of. I heard he appeared young and not very tall," the purple-haired woman added. "I too wish to see what sort of figure this powerful cultivator truly is." "Since you are both so eager," the saintess chuckled softly. A silver mark appeared upon her forehead as she addressed the holy beast beneath her in an ancient tongue. Her tone reverent. The beast snorted and surged forward in a streak of azure light. The other cultivators hastily followed. They pursued the river for over 200 kilometers before reaching a stretch of narrow channels. Suddenly, a faint crimson streak burst forth from the water, racing into the distance before vanishing without a trace. Waiting for her companions to catch up, the saintess spoke urgently. "This is bad." The foreign cultivator sensed danger and used a secret evasion technique. He is already over 100 kilometers away. Given the strength of his spiritual sense, this will be troublesome. "The others are too slow. Let us move ahead and block his path. Otherwise, tracking him again will be difficult." The two grand immortals raised no objections. They quickly sent voice transmissions to the cultivators behind them before accelerating with all their might. Though they could no longer lock onto the foreign cultivator's aura from such a distance, the incarnation of the holy beast possessed profound abilities. They remained firmly on his trail. The chase lasted an entire day. Each time Han Li used the blood shadow evasion technique to open a vast gap, they would soon rediscover his trail and resume pursuit. After being forced to unseal his cultivation 3 times without shaking them off, Han Li's heart finally grew heavy. That's all for today's content. See you in the next part. Support me by becoming a member. It will give me more motivation. Thank you so much.